football, softball, basketball, hockey, and horseshoes. They made the most of their allotted activity periods to host a wide variety of athletic competitions. Dances, plays, and jazz band performances were also held, along with the celebrations at Christmas and Easter. For the camp's inmates, these activities were a spiritual release and an opportunity to give the children something normal among the chaos, to enrich them and brighten their outlook on life.
I should tell you that the teenagers, we had names for the guards. And one guard in particular we called Bushingdi, because everything you wanted to do, he would say, bushing, bushing, bushing. That's all the Chinese he had. I remember Bushingdi came to the show that this dance band was putting on. They were putting on special music. Bushingdi was sitting in the front row because he had to, make sure we weren't doing anything wrong. And very quickly, this singer said, I want to dedicate this next song to Bushingdi. And he said it very quickly. So we heard it, but the guard didn't hear it. And he started in this song, which I've never heard since, but he said, I wish you were dead, you rascal, you. And of course, we all laughed, and of course, Bushingdi didn't know what we were laughing about, and he kept looking around like this. But we used to have fun in the camp.
During the routines of camp life, the inmates never gave up hope. They encouraged and cared for each other, and quietly filled the camp with a sense of optimism and a keep trying attitude. Among the many inmates, one special group was that of over 300 children. Some were from the Yantai Zhifu School, founded by Westerners before the war. The rest had been sent to the camp with their parents. Faced with these innocent eyes, the inmates had no choice but to care for and educate them, and see to it that they grew up healthy.
We were marched into this concentration camp, and our teacher said, how do you keep the spirit alive in the midst of a bloody war? She said, the teacher said, we will try to make the world as normal as we could for these children. Try to make the world just like it was before if we can. The teacher said, listen to this. We will get out of this place. God will take us out of this place, and when we get out, you're going to have to compete with other boys and girls who've been going to school in America and England and Australia.
The camp's adults and teachers quickly began providing for the children's education as if by instinct. After repeated negotiations with the Japanese, former Chilu University Dean L.J. Davies won for the children the right to an education. The Self-Governance Committee established an education committee that was responsible for finding teachers and creating classes from kindergarten through high school. They set up a kindergarten and daycare center for children 6 and under, and 2 schools for children from 7 to 16, based on the US and UK educational systems, respectively. With no classrooms available, classes were held outdoors during the spring, summer, and fall. During the bone-chilling winters, classes were moved into the cramped dormitories, where children studied sitting on beds or suitcases. When they were sent to Weihsen, the teachers insisted that the students carry their books with them. Once inside the camp, the books were circulated and passed down from one class to the next, allowing the camp schools to teach English, French, Latin, math, biology, history, and geography.
We sometimes wrote in pen, but quite often we wrote in pencil and rubbed it out and started again because there was no fresh paper. I didn't want to show you one or two of my other books. They weren't so neat. This is a neater one. So this is my science book. There's a picture of a heart. And not to read in detail, but you see the sort of thing that we did then.
Teachers focused on continuing the education of their students so that they would not fall behind their peers on the outside. The teachers made their little world as pleasant and normal as possible, to the extent that many people who lived here as children remember it exclusively as a happy time. The only thing that reminded them that they were prisoners of the Japanese was the roll call every morning at 7:30.
This is my prisoner badge, which I had to wear every time to roll call, in the morning and in the afternoon. If it was snowing, we still had to go out. If the sun was beating down, we still had to go out. And we stood there for about an hour every morning and afternoon. Now these days you can't imagine it. We had to number in Japanese. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and we had to learn to count in Japanese.
From the September 18th incident in 1931 through the outbreak of war in the Pacific, Japan had continually encroached on China. And as the battle lines lengthened, Japan's limitations as a small island nation were exposed. Supplies were running low, troop morale was low, and civilians, including children, were being forced onto the front lines. Japan was running out of options. At the Battle of Midway in 1942, Japan lost large amounts of equipment and suffered heavy casualties, and its military power began to wane. To keep the war machine running, the country would have to pay a heavy price. As Japan's military power waned, life at Weihsen became more and more difficult.
Our food deteriorated as time went on in Weihsen. But you see, the Chinese around were suffering, weren't they? And the Japanese had very little food. So if they weren't going to give us extra. We were prisoners.
The teachers were used to the challenges of educating young minds, but they were unprepared for the toll that the camp was taking on their students' health. Long-term malnourishment had left the children emaciated and their teeth dull. Some even stopped growing altogether. As time went on, the camp's doctors became very concerned about the poor quality of the food and its impact on the children's health. particularly the lack of calcium.
And after all, we were just the right age to be interned, because being 16, my bones had grown. It was quite interesting. My first wisdom tooth was half out, and none of my wisdom teeth moved all through camp. And I hadn't been in England 3 months before I had all 4 of them.
Our teachers were afraid that we would be lacking in calcium. So they took eggshells and ground them. And then they said, come along, a spoonful a day. And so we had to try and swallow this stuff. It was very fluffy, very powdery, and very dry.
In addition to a shortage of food and an even more severe shortage of medicine, clothing for the children was in short supply, particularly shoes. Many children went barefoot in the spring, summer, and fall, just so that they would have shoes to wear in the winter. Even in these trying conditions, teachers did not relax their demands on students or let them feel sorry for themselves. On the contrary, they made all the children feel loved and insisted that they remain courteous and respectful, even to the Japanese guards.
Well, our teacher said, you have to march in a straight line, and you have to have your back up straight, be proud. They said, you might be a prisoner on the outside, but you're not a prisoner on the inside. One set of manners in the Weihsen concentration camp, and another set of manners for the princesses in Buckingham Palace in England.
And they had the forethought of bringing in previous year's Oxford Local School Certificate examination papers. And so they said, look, you're here, we don't know how long this will last. You have an opportunity to study. We will have school as far as we can, and we will try and set exams. And hopefully, when the day comes for victory, then we will be able to bring your papers home to England, and the Oxford authorities will accept them. So work towards that end.
In the camp, every detail mattered. Courtesy and personal hygiene were strictly enforced. Socks and shoes were kept clean and neat, even as they fell apart at the seams. Even under these extreme conditions, idle time was strictly limited. Classes were held at regular hours, and students were still tested according to Oxford University standards.
I sat in a kitchen, and my feet were where the ashes come out from the cooker. And we had boards across, and I was given the allotted time, and it was invigilated very carefully, so they could tell the authorities that it was all done very properly, as usual. And I sat the exam. Then they kept the papers. Our teachers read them, and they said, we're not quite sure if you passed or not, because they were cautious. But they kept them to the end of the war.
And after the war, the headmaster took these 2 exams that the children had written. He took them personally to Oxford University, and he said, these are the exams they did in the concentration camp. Please, will you accept them? And they looked at them and they marked them, and most of us passed.
It is worth noting that 3 classes from Estelle and Margaret's Yentai Jerfu school graduated while at the camp. The first 2 classes graduated with 100% success. And even the 3rd class, despite the deteriorating political situation, still graduated 9 of its 11 students. Most of the students went directly to Oxford after the war. The 1981 movie Chariots of Fire, which won 4 Academy Awards, is based on the true story of Eric Liddell, one of the most illustrious of the camp's inmates. A pious Christian, Liddell refused to run the finals of the 100-meter dash at the 1924 Paris Olympics because it was held on a Sunday. A teammate gave him the chance to run the 400 meters instead, and he not only won the race, but did it in world record time.
当我们到了这个集中营的时候，一听说1924年奥运的这个英雄在我们的集中营，哇，那就带给我们很大的兴趣。
Just 1 year after the Olympics, Liddell left behind the fame he had won for himself and came back to China, his birthplace, as a missionary and teacher at Tianjin New Learning Middle School.
他这个人很结实，个子并不很高。他穿衣服也是穿得很朴素了，很精神。他的这个无论是在体育场里面呢，在校园里面呢，他是一个很活泼、很高兴的，是吧？永远带着笑容啊，所以很喜爱中国学生啊，在一起的这么一位老师。
When Japan openly invaded China in 1937, Liddell remained in the country he loved. In May 1941, he sent his pregnant wife and 2 daughters to safety in Canada. He was later arrested by the Japanese, and in March 1942, he was sent to Weihsen. In the camp, Liddell was assigned to the task of teaching science at the school and organizing athletic activities. He also acted as an overseer of the communal dorm where the single men and children lived. He took jobs that no one else would do, like clean the toilets and make cold briquettes out of coal dust and clay. He also helped care for the camp's elderly, sick, and weak, chopping wood for them and standing in line to buy their coal and other ration goods.
He made a book for me of the we didn't have any books to study, but he wrote out all the rules of chemistry, and I studied with him there.
This is the chemistry textbook that Liddell wrote at the camp, relying only on his remarkable memory. It is a piece of the camp's history and one of Joyce's most prized possessions. Stephen was one of Liddell's students and also worked with him on the camp's self-governance committee, planning sports and musical activities. At the time, Stephen was 17 and Liddell was 43, but they spent a lot of time together and became close friends despite their age difference.
We would talk about many different things, but he would never talk about his Olympic fame. He wouldn't talk about that. He was a very modest person. and we all liked him very much.
The endless stream of children who came looking for Eric was a constant irritation to his roommate, who eventually made a card for the door with "Eric is in" and "Eric is not in" written on the both sides to give the children an idea of his whereabouts.
他在奥运的时候，因为他是一个虔诚的基督徒，要做礼拜，他就不赛跑，100米他就不跑了。可是，在集中营的时候，他发现这些孩子礼拜天没有事情干，就做一些不该做的事情，他马上出来。
During the Olympics, Little refused to run on Sunday, but in the camp, he changed this long-held habit. And for the sake of the children and their health, he organized Sunday activities.
所以你在这一方面就看见他的信仰，不是四四方方的，真是一个很活的。他可以在他信仰方面就站稳，但是他看见这些孩子走错路的时候，他一定要伸出手来帮助他们。
We stayed together. After 2 or 3 months, we said maybe within 2 months we will be liberated, but never thought that we would be confined for 2 years and a half.
Sitting quietly and waiting to die is not an option for people who are young and full of life, and who would rather risk the chance of going out in a blaze of glory. Beneath the quiet surface of camp life, a bold plan was taking shape. One that was extremely dangerous, but that might hold the key to opening contact with the outside world and improving conditions within the camp. From the winter of 1943 to 1944, the struggle for freedom entered a new phase as the secret plan was put into action.
You know, for young people like I was, 31, after 2 years we had enough of life in camp. So we tried different means to go out.
32-year-old Englishman Lawrence Tipton was a former telegraph operator and lieutenant in the British Navy, and had been working at Tianjin BA Tobacco Company when he was sent to Weihsen. He spoke good Chinese and was the camp's unofficial postman, responsible for transmitting messages from the outside. 24-year-old American Arthur Hummel had been a teacher at Beijing Furen Middle School. 40 years later, he would begin another distinguished career in China, a subject for later in our story.
We arranged for Tipton and Hummel to go out. And the idea was that they would keep in touch with troops in Chongqing or with guerrillas, and perhaps help us send some food or some medicines for us in the camp.
To make sure they would be safe after their escape and that they would be able to communicate with the camp, they had Zhang Xingtai contact local anti-Japanese guerrilla forces. Zhang once again was generous with his assistance, and after several attempts was able to contact guerrilla forces active in the Weihsen area. On May 4, 1944, the guerrilla forces sent a letter into the camp, expressing sympathy for their struggle and offering both encouragement and assistance for the planned escape plan. While the secret plan was getting underway, another, much larger secret plan was being hatched as well. In November 1943, at the Tehran Conference, Allied leaders decided to open a second front in Europe. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy, successfully opening the second front. The German defeat signaled a new stage in the global war against fascism, and victory came closer and closer. At this moment, behind the high walls and electric fences, Tipton, Hummel, fathers Henked and De Jigger, and their partner Hoi Chu nervously awaited nightfall. The success of their whole plan would depend on what happened over the next few hours. After weeks and months of painstaking preparation, on the evening of June 10, 1944, their plan sprang into action.
That was alongside the wall, and it was just at 10 o'clock in the evening, that was the lights out. We had to watch Japanese guards who come in the main street.
To make their escape, they waited for the nightly changing of the guards. Every night, during the changing of the guards, the Japanese would turn off the electricity for 10 minutes to prevent accidents and injuries. This was their only chance to climb over the electric fence. Tipton and Hummel climbed a water tower in the sports field where they waited for the changing of the guards. Once the electricity was off, they quickly slipped over the fence. Meanwhile, local guerrilla troops were waiting for them 2 miles away. After their escape, Tipton and Hummel were able to increase communication between the camp and the outside, despite the best efforts of the Japanese. After meeting up with the guerrilla forces, they were taken to the headquarters of